Today, on my way home from the gym, I saw a homeless guy on the side of the road begging, and it made me uncomfortable. Now, this isn't out of the ordinary for me. There is no shortage of less fortunate people where I live, but this time was a little different. Instead of avoiding eye contact and looking away in attempts to avoid the uncomfort or unease that the sight of this homeless guy brought me, I asked myself why it aroused this feeling in me. I've been pondering this since it happened, and I feel like a lot of people share a similar sentiment. Even if you don't want to admit it, I feel like the average person gets this same sense of being uncomfortable when interacting or seeing homeless people. And I believe this feeling is the result of a combination of aspects that you wouldn't normally comprehend. The first one is supremacy. You actively look down upon them, even if you don't want to. Seeing an individual with less than you, literally at rock bottom, in a way that you can think about but not necessarily emotionally comprehend. If I asked you what it would feel like to be homeless, you could tell me what you imagine it would feel like, but most of you couldn't have a true understanding of that feeling. This forces you to mentally acknowledge that you are in a better situation or life than these people. When we compare ourselves to other people, we tend to be biased towards other people's lives, assuming they're either equal or better than our own. For example, if you meet someone with more money than you assume their standard of living is better than yours because they have more resources. But this isn't necessarily true all the time. While a rich man isn't stressing out about rent, he could be in an abusive marriage or have deep rooted insecurities that you would be resistant to. The same applies to your peers. When you're comparing yourself to your friends, it's not uncommon to form a jealousy because someone else appears to be more fortunate. Even if it's not necessarily full on jealousy, it's still envy of what they have. And this happens on a subconscious level because we can't always see or relate to their struggles. Therefore, we make judgments based on what we can perceive. When looking at a homeless person, it's visible. You can tell by looking at these individuals that their quality of life is significantly less than yours, and you are unable to relate on a deep level. Most people haven't been this unfortunate. Once someone realizes that somebody else's life is worse than theirs, they naturally try and empathize with their situation. The problem is, homeless are so obviously so much less fortunate that you have trouble empathizing because you intuitively recognize that you cannot truly relate to their position. This leads to the second aspect, which is guilt. Now, some will say, yeah, well, duh, but it's not just the guilt of knowing that you have more than someone. There's a much bigger added guilt of not being able to emotionally relate. This is what reinforces it and makes it more uneasy and not just a guilty feeling. This actually works in their favor because you're more likely to give them money, especially if they're begging. This isn't always intentional, but some beggars do intentionally wear their worst clothes to get more donations. Not that all of them do this, but some. This doesn't negate their moral compass. These are desperate people. If they're not truly desperate, that's a different situation. But strictly referring to authentically desperate individuals, they aren't less deserving of money because they optimize to get more donations. Alternatively, if you would argue that this does make them less deserving than a more genuine beggar, this could be a part of the final aspect, which is justification. Some people see homeless and justify this apparent superiority with possible assumptions about the individual, such as they're on drugs, they should have gotten jobs, and they're probably getting plenty of donations. Anything that justifies not giving them money by assuming something about the person. This isn't to say not giving them your money isn't justifiable. But if you have to assume variables, there's a high probability you're just trying to avoid the guilt that they made you feel. I'd go as far to say that it's not even immoral of you to not give them your money. It wouldn't be considered immoral to not give them your last $5. It wouldn't even be considered immoral to not give them your 20th $5. You did earn this money, and you don't deserve it less than they do. Just because they need it more doesn't mean preserving your resources and life shouldn't take priority. If you do donate to homeless people, it should be surplus of your satisfaction, not a sacrifice. If you genuinely do not need $5, then donating it isn't bad. You have all of your uses with that money and you're able to pass it on to someone who doesn't. This not only aids in someone else's satisfaction, but helps with your guilt by knowing you did something to help the situation. I present all of this to say that you shouldn't feel awkward about the definitively unfortunate. There is no way for you to be responsible for their lives, and you should acknowledge your intuitive feelings. Show empathy, not pity. Make an effort to feel less guilty next time you pass the corner crackhead. Attempt to understand his position, but don't form an emotional burden or ethical obligation.